The stagecoach rolled into Wheatland, Wyoming territory on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, carrying dust, passengers weary from travel, and one woman dressed entirely in black who looked like she had already buried everything worth living for. Julia Winters stepped down onto the wooden platform with movements so careful and controlled that anyone watching might have thought she was made of porcelain, liable to shatter at the slightest wrong touch. She was 24 years old, though the veil covering her face and the mourning dress that fell to her ankles made her seem older, wrapped in grief like a shroud. The town spread before her in shades of brown and gold, buildings weathered by wind and sun, their false fronts reaching optimistically toward the blue sky. Men in dusty boots and wide-brimmed hats moved along the dirt street. Horses tied to hitching posts swished their tails against flies, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. It was a living, breathing place, so different from the silence that had followed her across half the country. Julia carried only one small trunk and a carpet bag. Everything else, everything that had mattered, was gone. The stage driver set her trunk down with a thud that raised dust, tipped his hat, and climbed back up to continue his route. She stood alone on the platform, uncertain for the first time since she had made her decision to leave Philadelphia and come to this raw frontier town where her late husband had owned property she had never seen. "Madam, you need help with that trunk." The voice came from behind her, deep and kind, touched with the slow drawl she was still getting accustomed to hearing out here. Julia turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his hat already in his hands. He was tall and lean in the way of men who worked hard for their living, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and chaps that spoke of long hours in the saddle. Dust covered his boots and the ends of his sleeves. "I can manage," Julia said quietly, her Philadelphia accent crisp even through her weariness. "I do not doubt that, madam, but it would not sit right with me to watch you struggle." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes, genuine and warm. "Name is Nathan Nash. I work at the stable just down the street, and I promise I am not some drifter looking to make off with your belongings." Despite everything, despite the weight of her grief and the exhaustion of weeks spent traveling, Julia felt something crack just slightly in the wall she had built around herself. "Julia Winters, and I suppose I could use the assistance." Nathan stepped forward and lifted her trunk with an ease that suggested it weighed nothing at all. "Where are you heading, Mrs. Winters?" The title felt like a knife, sharp and unwelcome. She was not really a Mrs. anymore, was she? Widows occupied some strange in-between space, neither maiden nor wife. "I own property here. The old Henderson place, I believe it is called. My husband purchased it before he passed." Nathan's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his features. "I know the place. It is about 2 miles out of town, sits on good land near the creek. Has not been occupied for a spell, though. Might need some work." "I expected as much." Julia picked up her carpetbag and gestured down the street. "Is there a hotel where I might stay while I determine what needs to be done?" "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house is your best option. Clean rooms, good meals, and she does not abide by roughness or drinking on the premises. I will take you there first, then bring your trunk along." They walked together down the main street, Julia acutely aware of the glances sent their way. A woman in full mourning was a sight anywhere, but particularly here where the population seemed to be overwhelmingly male. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, willing herself not to show any weakness. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters, remarkably well-maintained compared to some of the rougher buildings Julia had passed. A woman emerged onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Nathan Nash, is that you bringing me a new boarder?" Mrs. Patterson called. "Yes, madam. This is Mrs. Winters, just arrived from back east. She's going to need a room while she settles the Henderson property." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened as she took in Julia's morning attire. "You poor dear. Come inside out of this heat. Nathan, you can bring that trunk right up to the front room on the second floor. It has the best cross breeze." The interior of the boarding house was blessedly cool and smelled of bread and lemon polish. The furnishings were simple but well kept, everything speaking of a woman who took pride in her establishment. Mrs. Patterson led Julia upstairs while Nathan followed with the trunk, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. The room was small but clean, with a bed covered in a white quilt, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a single chair by the window that looked out over the street. Nathan set the trunk at the foot of the bed and stepped back, his hat still in his hands. "Thank you, Mr. Nash," Julia said, reaching for her reticule to offer him a coin. He held up a hand, shaking his head. "No need for that, madam. Welcome to Wheatland. If you need anything, I am usually at the stable or out at my place just north of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction." After he left, Mrs. Patterson helped Julia remove her veil and bonnet, chattering in a gentle way that did not require much response. She brought up a pitcher of cool water, laid out clean towels, and promised supper would be at 6 o'clock sharp. When she finally left Julia alone, the silence rushed in like a flood. Julia sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands, still gloved in black. She had been wearing black for 8 months now, ever since the telegram had arrived informing her of Thomas's death. A riding accident, they had said. He had been out here in Wyoming, overseeing his investments when his horse had thrown him. By the time the news reached Philadelphia, he had already been buried in a cemetery Julia had never seen. Their marriage had been brief, and if she was honest with herself, not particularly happy. Thomas Winters had been 15 years her senior, a business associate of her father's who had seemed stable and respectable. She had been 19 and foolish enough to believe that respect and stability were enough. He had been gone more than he was home, always chasing the next opportunity, the next investment. And now he was dead, and she had inherited property in a territory she had never imagined visiting, let alone living in. But there was nothing left for her in Philadelphia. Her parents had died 2 years ago in a flu epidemic. She had no siblings, no close family. The small house she and Thomas had shared had been sold to settle his debts. The property in Wyoming was all that remained, and so she had come west with a determination born of having no other choices. That first evening, Julia took supper in the boarding house dining room with the other residents. 2 traveling salesmen, an elderly gentleman who taught at the small schoolhouse, and a young couple recently married. Everyone was polite, offering condolences when they noticed her morning dress, but not prying. Mrs. Patterson served beef stew with fresh bread and butter, and Julia found herself eating more than she had in weeks, the food simple but good. The next morning, she woke early to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of the town coming to life. After dressing and pinning her veil in place, she went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen. "I need to see the property," Julia said. "The Henderson place. Is there someone who could take me there?" Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron, considering. "Nathan Nash would be your best bet. He knows the area well, and he has a wagon you could use to haul any supplies you might need." His place is not far from there, so he would know the condition of things. Julia hesitated. She did not want to impose on the man who had already helped her, but she also did not know anyone else in this town. How would I go about asking him? Just walk down to the stable. He is usually there by now, tending the horses or doing repair work. Tell him I sent you. The stable was exactly where Nathan had indicated, a large barn-like structure with a corral attached. Several horses grazed in the corral, and Julia could hear someone moving around inside the barn. She stepped into the dimmer interior, letting her eyes adjust. Nathan was there, brushing down a large bay horse with long, steady strokes. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and that same genuine smile crossed his face. "Mrs. Winters, good morning. What brings you by, Mrs.? Patterson suggested I speak with you about visiting the property I inherited. I need to see what condition it is in and determine what needs to be done." Nathan gave the horse a final pat and set the brush aside. "I can take you out there this morning if you like. Let me hitch up the wagon and we will head out. It is a pleasant ride, and the weather should hold." 20 minutes later, Julia found herself seated beside Nathan on a wagon bench, rolling out of town along a rutted dirt road that cut through open prairie. The landscape was so different from anything she had known. Vast and open, with mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. Grass rippled in waves under the wind, and the sky stretched overhead impossibly huge and blue. Nathan handled the reins with easy competence, letting the horses set their own pace. "Have you been out west before, Mrs. Winters?" "Never. I have spent my entire life in Philadelphia." "That must be quite a change, then. What brings you all the way out here, if you do not mind my asking?" Julia hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding what would become common knowledge anyway. "My husband purchased this property as an investment. He died 8 months ago while visiting Wyoming. I inherited the land, and since I had nothing keeping me in Philadelphia, I decided to come see it for myself." "I am sorry for your loss," Nathan said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "Losing someone you love is never easy." "Thank you." Julia did not correct his assumption about love. What did it matter what strangers thought of her marriage? They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the horses' hooves, and the wind through the grass. Julia found herself relaxing slightly, the tension she had carried for months easing just a bit in the openness of the landscape. "There it is," Nathan said, pointing ahead. The Henderson place sat in a small valley with a creek running through it, just as Nathan had described. The house was a modest single-story structure built of logs and rough-cut lumber, with a covered porch across the front. A barn stood behind it, along with what looked like a chicken coop and a small shed. The property was surrounded by good grassland, and Julia could see the creek sparkling in the sunlight. But it was also clear that the place had been abandoned for some time. The windows were shuttered, weeds had overtaken what might once have been a garden, and one corner of the porch sagged ominously. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Julia down. She walked slowly toward the building, her heart sinking with each step. This was hers, this neglected piece of frontier property. This was all she had left. Nathan came to stand beside her. "It needs work. I will not lie to you about that, but the bones are good. The structure is sound, the location is excellent with that creek water, and the land itself is fine for grazing or farming. With some effort, this could be a real nice place." "I do not know anything about making a place like this livable," Julia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know how to farm or raise animals. I lived in a city my entire life." "Well," Nathan said slowly, "you have two choices as I see it. You could sell the property and head back east. There are folks around here who would pay fair money for land like this. Or you could stay and learn. It would not be easy, but it is possible. Julia looked at the house, at the sagging porch and shuttered windows, and felt something stir inside her. It was not hope exactly, but it was something close to determination. She had come all this way. She had left everything behind. Maybe it was time to stop running from grief and start building something new. "I want to see inside," she said. Nathan produced a key from his pocket. "The land office gave me this when I told them I would be showing you the place." Thomas Winters had left it with them when he purchased the property. The door stuck when Nathan tried to open it, swollen from weather and neglect. He put his shoulder to it and shoved, and it swung inward with a groan. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of sunlight that entered with them. The interior was a single large room with a fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area, and a door that led to what Julia assumed was a bedroom. Furniture sat covered in dust sheets like ghosts. The floorboards were solid under her feet, though they creaked with every step. There was a musty smell, but nothing worse than that. Nathan walked through, checking the walls and ceiling, peering up the chimney, testing the floor in various spots. "Like I said, the structure is sound. Needs cleaning, airing out, some repairs here and there. The well out back should still be good. I can check it for you." While he went outside, Julia moved slowly through the space, trying to imagine it as a home. She pulled the dust sheet off a rocking chair and found it to be well made, the wood dark and smooth. There was a table with 4 chairs, a cupboard, an iron stove. In the bedroom, she found a simple bed frame and a wardrobe. Someone had started to make a home here. Someone had chosen these things, arranged them with care. And then they had left or died or moved on, and it had all been abandoned. Nathan returned, brushing dust from his hands. "Well is good. Water is clear and sweet. The barn needs some work on the roof, but it is usable. There is old hay in the loft, probably should be cleared out. Chicken coop needs mending but could be made functional quick enough." Julia turned to face him, a decision crystallizing in her mind. "Mr. Nash, I know we have only just met, but I find myself in need of help. If I am going to make this place livable, I will need someone who knows what they are doing. Would you be willing to help me? I can pay you for your time." Nathan considered her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I have my own place to run, Mrs. Winters, and I work at the stable, but I could spare some hours here and there, especially in the evenings and on Sundays. And I would not feel right taking money from a widow trying to make a fresh start. How about this? You pay me in meals. I am not much of a cook, and Mrs. Patterson's rates are more than I like to spend most nights. You learn to cook on that stove, and you feed me while I am working here." That seems a fair trade. It was more than fair, it was generous to the point of charity, but Julia sensed that Nathan Nash was the kind of man who would be offended if she pointed that out. "That sounds acceptable. When can we start? How about tomorrow evening? That will give you time to get supplies in town, cleaning things and such. Make a list of what you think you will need, and I can help you get it loaded up. We will start with cleaning the place out, and then we will go from there." They spent another hour walking the property, with Nathan pointing out various features and explaining what would need to be done. There was a small vegetable garden plot that had gone wild, a root cellar that was still functional, and a beautiful view of the mountains from the front porch. By the time they climbed back onto the wagon to return to town, Julia felt exhausted but also strangely alive, more awake than she had felt in months. On the ride back, Nathan told her about Wheatland, pointing out landmarks and explaining the town's brief history. It had been established only a few years earlier in 1871, when the railroad had come through. The population was small but growing, a mix of ranchers, farmers, railroad workers, and the businesses that supported them. There was a general store, a church, the school where the elderly gentleman boarded at Mrs. Patterson's taught, a doctor, and a handful of saloons that Nathan advised her to avoid. "It is not Philadelphia," he said with a slight smile, "but it is a good town. People help each other out here. They will help you too once they know you are planning to stay." "Why are you helping me?" Julia asked suddenly. "You do not know me. I am just a stranger who arrived yesterday." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "My mother was widowed when I was 12, he finally said. "My father died in the war. We had a farm in Missouri, and she did not know the first thing about running it. Neighbors helped us, taught her what she needed to know, helped with the heavy work until my brother and I were old enough to take over. She always said that kindness saved our lives. I guess I figure if I can pay that forward, I should." They did not speak much after that, but the silence was comfortable. When they reached town, Nathan helped her down from the wagon and tipped his hat. "I will see you tomorrow evening, Mrs. Winters, about 6 o'clock." 6 o'clock, Julia agreed. That afternoon, she visited the general store and made a list of supplies with the help of the proprietor, Mr. Chen, a Chinese man who had come to work on the railroad and stayed to open his business. He was patient with her questions and suggested items she had not thought of. Lye soap for heavy cleaning, vinegar for the windows, candles, matches, a good broom, buckets, rags. The list grew longer and the cost higher, but Julia had the money from selling the Philadelphia house, and she was determined to do this right. Mr. Chen promised to have everything ready for pickup the next day, and Julia walked back to the boarding house feeling purposeful for the first time since Thomas's death. Mrs. Patterson met her on the porch with a knowing smile. "So you have decided to stay then?" "It appears so," Julia said. "I hope I am not making a terrible mistake." "The only mistake would be not trying," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "This is a good place for new beginnings, Mrs. Winters. You will see." That night, Julia lay in bed and thought about new beginnings. She thought about the house by the creek, about Nathan Nash's easy kindness, about the vast blue sky and the mountains in the distance. For the first time in 8 months, she fell asleep without crying. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Julia changed out of her heavy mourning dress into something more practical, though still black, and pinned her hair back severely. She collected her supplies from the general store, and Nathan arrived promptly at 6 o'clock with the wagon. They loaded everything up and made the journey back to the property in the long golden light of evening. Inside the house, Julia tied a scarf over her hair and began the work of cleaning. Nathan opened all the shutters, letting light and air flood through, and together they hauled the dust-covered furniture outside to be beaten clean. Julia scrubbed floors on her hands and knees, washed windows until they gleamed, and swept away months of accumulated dust and dirt. Nathan worked on repairs, fixing the sagging porch board, oiling door hinges, checking the roof for leaks. They worked until the light failed, and then Nathan helped her close everything up again. Julia was filthy, her dress covered in dust and her hands raw despite the gloves she had worn. But there was satisfaction in the exhaustion, a sense of having accomplished something real. "You did good work today," Nathan said as they drove back to town under the stars. "The place is already starting to look better. Thank you for your help. I could not have done it without you." "You could have. It would have just taken longer." He glanced at her in the darkness. "You are stronger than you think, Mrs. Winters." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a routine. Julia would spend her days preparing meals and doing lighter cleaning work, and Nathan would arrive in the evenings to help with the heavier repairs and outdoor work. They fixed the barn roof together, with Julia handing up tools while Nathan worked on the ladder. They cleared the garden plot and planted late-season vegetables that Nathan said would still have time to grow. They mended the chicken coop, and Nathan arrived one evening with 6 hens and a rooster in crates. "You will need eggs," he said simply. "These are good layers. I will show you how to care for them." Julia learned to scatter feed, collect eggs, and lock the coop at night against predators. She learned to work the well pump, to build a fire in the stove, to cook simple meals over the heat. Nathan was patient with her mistakes, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that seemed second nature to him. And slowly, as they worked side by side, they began to talk. Nathan told her about growing up in Missouri, about joining the Army at 17 and serving in the Indian Wars, about coming to Wyoming after his discharge to start fresh. He had worked as a ranch hand for several years before saving enough to buy his own small spread and establish himself. "It is not much," he said one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, eating the stew Julia had made. "Just a small house, some grazing land, a dozen head of cattle, but it is mine, earned with my own work." "That sounds like a lot to me," Julia said. "You should be proud." "What about you?" Nathan asked. "What was your life like back in Philadelphia?" Julia set down her bowl, considering how much to share. "Comfortable, I suppose. My father was a banker. We lived in a nice neighborhood, had servants, went to church on Sundays. I was educated at a girls' school. It all seems very far away now, like it happened to someone else." "Do you miss it?" "I miss my parents," Julia said honestly. "But the rest of it? No, I was living the life I was expected to live, not one I chose. At least here, I am making my own decisions, even if I am not always sure they are the right ones." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something warm in his expression. "I think you are doing just fine." As the days passed, Julia began to notice small changes in herself. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended, grew calloused from work. Her skin darkened despite the bonnets she wore, touched by sun and wind. She grew stronger, able to lift and carry things that would have been impossible when she first arrived. And the constant ache of grief that had weighed on her began to lighten, not disappearing but becoming something she could carry without it crushing her. She also began to notice Nathan in ways that had nothing to do with his usefulness as a helper. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. The gentle way he handled the animals, firm but kind. The patience in his voice when he explained something to her for the 3rd time. One evening in late August, nearly a month after her arrival in Wheatland, they finished the last major repair, replacing the rotten boards in the barn wall. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan stood back and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "That is it," he said. "The place is sound now. You could move in tomorrow if you wanted." Julia felt a strange pang at his words. "Does that mean you will not be coming by any more?" Nathan turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "That depends on whether you want me to keep coming by." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Julia knew she should be cautious, should maintain proper distance. She was a widow, still in mourning. Nathan was a man who had been nothing but kind, and she did not want to presume on that kindness. But she also knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she wanted to see him again, wanted to keep seeing him. "I would like that," she said quietly, "if you are willing." Nathan's face broke into a smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made her heart do strange things in her chest. "I am willing. Maybe I could take you into town on Sunday to the church service. It would be good for folks to see you settling in. And afterwards there is usually a social with food and such. I would like that too." That night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, Julia thought about the turn her life had taken. A few months ago, she had been drowning in grief and uncertainty, wearing black and feeling like she would never smile again. Now she was planning to attend a church social with a cowboy who made her feel things she had never felt with her own husband. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like a betrayal. But it did not. It felt like waking up after a long sleep. She moved into the house the following week, with help from Nathan and a few other men from town he recruited. Her possessions were few enough that it did not take long to settle in. Mrs. Patterson sent her off with preserves and bread, making Julia promise to visit often. The young married couple from the boarding house gave her seeds for her garden. Mr. Chen from the general store extended her credit for supplies. The first night in her own house, Julia sat in the rocking chair and looked around at the space she had transformed. The floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, the stove radiated warmth. Curtains she had sewn herself hung at the windows. Her few belongings were arranged neatly. Books on a shelf, her mother's quilt on the bed, a photograph of her parents on the mantel. It was simple, but it was hers, truly hers in a way nothing had ever been before. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Nathan came to collect her in his wagon, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. Julia wore one of her black dresses, but she had removed the heavy veil, leaving her face uncovered for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. The church was a small white building at the edge of town, with a bell tower and windows that stood open to let in the breeze. People gathered outside before the service, talking and laughing, children running between the adults. When Julia arrived with Nathan, conversations paused and heads turned. Nathan helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm. "Do not worry," he said quietly. "They are just curious. They mean no harm." He introduced her around. The Johnsons, who ran the lumber mill, the Ray's family, who had a large ranch south of town, the widow Brennan, who ran the seamstress shop, the Andersons with their 6 children. Everyone was polite, welcoming even though Julia could see the questions in their eyes. Why was she here? What was her connection to Nathan Nash? What were her intentions? The service itself was simple and short, the young minister speaking about new beginnings and God's grace. Julia found herself actually listening, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of worship even in this unfamiliar place. When they sang hymns, Nathan's voice was a warm baritone beside her, steady and sure. Afterwards, tables were set up outside with food brought by various families. Julia had brought a cake she had baked the day before, nervous about how it would compare. But Mrs. Johnson pronounced it delicious, and it disappeared quickly alongside fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and fruit pies. Nathan stayed close to her side, making sure she was included in conversations, explaining relationships and history when needed. Julia watched him interact with his neighbors and saw genuine respect and affection. These people knew him, trusted him. Children ran up to show him things. Men clapped him on the shoulder. Women smiled at him warmly. He was part of the fabric of this community in a way Julia envied. "You are good with people," she said to him as they sat in the shade eating their meal. "I just treat folks like I want to be treated," Nathan said with a shrug. "Nothing fancy about it. It is more than that. They trust you. That is not something easily earned." Nathan looked thoughtful. "I suppose I have been here long enough now that folks know what to expect from me. I do what I say I will do, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. That matters out here." "It matters everywhere," Julia said. "It is just rarer than it should be." As the afternoon wore on, Julia found herself relaxing into the social atmosphere. She talked with Mrs. Brennan about possibly sewing some new dresses, ones more suitable for frontier life. She listened to Mrs. Ray's advice about preserving vegetables for winter. She watched children play and felt a wistfulness she had not expected. Thomas had not wanted children, had always said they would wait. And then there had been no more time. On the drive back to her house, Nathan was quiet. Julia watched the landscape roll past, the familiar route becoming known to her now. When they reached her property, Nathan helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you for today," Julia said. "I know it might have seemed like just another Sunday to you, but it meant a great deal to me. Feeling welcome, feeling like maybe I could belong here someday." "You already belong here," Nathan said. "You just have not realized it yet." He hesitated, then said, "Julia, I need to tell you something." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made her breath catch. "What is it? I know this is too soon." "I know you are still mourning your husband, and I have no right to speak, but I cannot keep pretending I am just helping a neighbor out of Christian charity." He took off his hat, worrying the brim in his hands. "I care about you. More than I should, probably. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to stop coming around, I will understand. But I had to be honest." Julia looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had taught her to build a new life, who made her feel things she had never expected to feel. She should have been shocked, should have told him it was inappropriate, but her heart was pounding and all she felt was a fierce gladness. "Nathan," she said, and his name felt right in her mouth, like something she had been waiting to say. "I am supposed to mourn for a year at least. That is what society expects, but my marriage was not what people probably think it was. Thomas and I barely knew each other. He was kind enough, but we did not love each other. Not really. I have been mourning, but not for a great love lost. I have been mourning the life I thought I was supposed to have, the future I expected, and I think I am done with that now." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "You make me feel alive again. You make me want to wear colors other than black. You make me smile and laugh and look forward to tomorrow. So no, I do not want you to stop coming around. I want the opposite of that." Nathan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Are you sure? I do not want you to have regrets." "I am sure," Julia whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, a question and an answer all at once. Julia felt warmth spread through her, melting the last of the ice that had encased her heart. This was what a kiss should feel like coming home, like discovering something precious, like hope. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks. Only weeks. I have wanted that since the first day I met you," he laughed, the sound full of joy. "Then I have been wasting time." They stood on her porch as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, and Julia felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was not the Philadelphia banker's daughter anymore. She was not Thomas Winters's widow. She was Julia, a woman building a new life in Wyoming territory, falling in love with a cowboy who had given her reasons to dream of wearing something other than mourning black. Over the next few months, they became a regular sight around Wheatland. Nathan and Julia, together more often than not. He taught her to ride horseback, starting her with a gentle mare and patiently coaching her through her fears. She learned to move with the horse, to read its moods, to feel the joy of riding across open land with the wind in her hair. She also began to learn the rhythms of frontier life. When harvest time came, neighbors helped each other bring in crops, moving from farm to farm in a cooperative effort. Julia joined the women in preparing massive meals for the workers, learning to cook for crowds, to preserve vegetables and fruits, to plan ahead for the long winter. Nathan's small herd of cattle grew, and he began to talk about the future, about expanding his operation, about the possibility of one day having a real ranch. He included Julia in these plans naturally, as if there was no question that she would be part of them. In October, Julia made a decision. She folded her mourning dresses carefully and put them away in the bottom of her trunk. She took the money she had been saving and went to Mrs. Brennan's shop to order new dresses in colors: blue like the Wyoming sky, green like the prairie grass, brown like the earth. Mrs. Brennan smiled knowingly and did not ask questions. Just measured Julia carefully and promised the dresses would be ready within 2 weeks. When Julia wore the first one, a deep blue calico with white buttons, Nathan's face, when he saw her, made every gossip's whisper worthwhile. He picked her up and spun her around right there in her front yard, both of them laughing like children. "You look beautiful," he said when he set her down. "You have always been beautiful, but seeing you in color, seeing you smile like that, it is like the sun coming out." "I am done mourning what I never really had," Julia said. "I want to start living the life I choose." "And what life is that?" Nathan asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "One with you in it, if you will have me." Nathan took her hands in his expression serious now. "Julia Winters, I know I am just a cowboy with a small spread and not much to my name. But I love you. I have loved you since you stepped off that stagecoach looking like you were going to fight the whole world alone. I want to spend my life making you happy, building a future together, filling that house of yours with love and laughter and maybe some children if you want them. Will you marry me?" Julia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Nathan Nash, I will marry you." They were married in November in the small white church where they had attended services together. Mrs. Patterson helped Julia sew a simple dress in cream-colored silk, not quite white but not colored either, a compromise between propriety and Julia's desire for something that felt like a new beginning. She wore flowers in her hair, late-blooming asters that Nathan had ridden miles to find for her. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Mr. Chen gave them a beautiful set of dishes. The Ray's family brought a young cow to add to Nathan's herd. Mrs. Brennan sewed Julia 2 new nightgowns as a wedding gift and winked when she presented them. The Johnsons gave them lumber to build an addition onto Julia's house. The ceremony was simple, the young minister speaking about love and commitment, about 2 people joining their lives together. When Nathan slipped the ring onto Julia's finger, a simple gold band he had saved for months to buy, her hand was steady. When she promised to love him for the rest of her life, she meant every word with an intensity that surprised her. This was what marriage should be, a choice made freely, with full heart and clear eyes. They held the reception in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Julia, who had been taught formal dances in Philadelphia, learned the livelier frontier reels and square dances, laughing as Nathan swung her around. She was breathless and happy, her cheeks flushed, feeling more alive than she could ever remember. As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson pulled Julia aside. "You know," she said, "when you first arrived here I worried about you. You looked like you had given up on everything, but look at you now. You are positively glowing." "I found what I did not even know I was looking for," Julia said. "I came here thinking I had lost everything, but really I had been given a chance to start over." "That is what this place does," Mrs. Patterson said. "It gives people second chances if they are brave enough to take them." You were brave enough. Nathan and Julia drove back to their home, no longer just Julia's but theirs together, in the wagon decorated with ribbons and old boots tied on by helpful friends. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the prairie. When they arrived, Nathan carried Julia across the threshold, a tradition she had read about but never experienced with Thomas. Inside, the house glowed with lamplight. They had spent the previous week preparing. cleaning everything until it shined, filling vases with the last of the autumn flowers, making the bed with new linens that Julia had embroidered during the long evenings. It was humble compared to the Philadelphia house Julia had shared with Thomas, but it was warm and welcoming and full of love. That night, in the quiet privacy of their bedroom, Nathan made love to Julia with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt cherished and desired. It was nothing like the brief, perfunctory encounters she had experienced with Thomas. This was what intimacy should be. A conversation without words, a giving and receiving, a joining that went beyond the physical. Afterwards, lying in Nathan's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Julia felt a completeness she had never known. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way about anyone." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "I love you too, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the Wyoming wind singing outside their windows, the future stretching before them full of possibility. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high and temperatures that dropped low enough to freeze water in the well bucket. But Julia and Nathan were prepared, with enough wood stacked for the stove, enough food preserved to last until spring, and each other to keep warm through the long dark nights. Nathan taught Julia to manage livestock in winter conditions, showing her how to break ice in the water troughs, how much hay to put out for the cattle, how to check the animals for signs of cold stress. They worked together in the frigid mornings, their breath forming clouds, their fingers numb even inside gloves. But there were good moments too. Evenings spent by the fire, with Julia reading aloud from books while Nathan worked on mending tack or carving. Sunday afternoons visiting neighbors, traveling by sleigh across the snow-covered prairie. Christmas celebrated simply but joyfully, with a small tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments, gifts exchanged that were practical but thoughtful. Julia gave Nathan a new hat she had saved for months to buy, a fine black Stetson that made him look even more handsome. He gave her a music box he had ordered from back east, knowing she missed the culture of Philadelphia even if she did not miss the life. When it played its delicate melody, Julia cried and laughed at the same time. In January, Julia began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she felt queasy in the mornings, exhausted by afternoon. She said nothing to Nathan at first, wanting to be sure, but when another month passed with the same symptoms, she knew. She told him on a cold evening in February, after supper was cleared away and they sat together by the fire. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the harness he was oiling, concern crossing his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Nathan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, wonder, and then a fierce protectiveness. He set aside the harness and pulled Julia into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Julia asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Nathan said. "You have given me everything, Julia. A home, love, and now a family. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I am grateful every single day." The pregnancy was not easy. Julia suffered from severe morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and by her 5th month, she was so large that moving around became difficult. The summer heat made everything worse, and there were days when she was convinced she could not endure another moment. But Nathan was endlessly patient and supportive. He took over more of the household tasks, cooking meals when Julia felt too ill, doing the washing, tending the garden. He brought her cool water and fanned her on hot days. At night, he rubbed her swollen feet and told her stories to distract her from discomfort. The women of Wheatland rallied around her too. Mrs. Patterson came to visit regularly, bringing special teas to ease nausea. Mrs. Rays, who had 6 children of her own, offered advice and reassurance. Mrs. Brennan sewed tiny gowns and blankets. Even the widow Brennan, who was known for being standoffish, brought by a beautiful hand-knitted shawl for the baby. In September of 1879, just over a year after Julia had arrived in Wheatland dressed in mourning black, she went into labor. Nathan rode hard to fetch the midwife, Mrs. O'Brien, an Irish woman with decades of experience. Then he was banished to the porch while the women took over. The labor was long and difficult. Julia had never experienced pain like this, wave after wave of it, relentless and overwhelming. But Mrs. O'Brien talked her through it, telling her when to push and when to rest, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her with stories of hundreds of other births she had attended. Finally, after 16 hours, Julia heard a sound that made all the pain worth it. The angry wail of a newborn baby. "You have a son," Mrs. O'Brien announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Julia's chest. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Julia looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fingers, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He was perfect. He was hers. He was theirs. Mrs. Patterson went to fetch Nathan, who burst into the room looking terrified and awed in equal measure. When he saw Julia holding their son, his eyes filled with tears. He came to kneel beside the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's small head with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "You did so well, Julia. I am so proud of you." "What should we name him?" Julia asked. They had discussed names but never decided definitively. Now, looking at their son, Julia knew what felt right. "What about Samuel, after your father, Samuel Nash?" Nathan's voice broke. "That would be perfect." Samuel was a good baby, though he kept them up many nights with his demands to be fed and changed and held. Julia learned to function on little sleep, to nurse while half dozing, to change diapers in the dark. Nathan helped as much as he could, walking Samuel when he fussed, doing extra chores so Julia could rest. The house that had been quiet was now filled with the sounds of a baby. Crying and cooing, little snuffles and sighs. Julia found herself singing lullabies she had not thought about in years, songs her own mother had sung to her. She watched Nathan hold their son, marveling at how tender this strong man could be, how naturally he took to fatherhood. As Samuel grew, he became the center of their world. His first smile at 6 weeks made both his parents cry. His first laugh at 3 months was the most beautiful sound Julia had ever heard. When he started to crawl, they had to reorganize the entire house to keep him safe from the stove, the fireplace, the stairs. Life settled into new rhythms. Nathan's cattle operation continued to grow, and he hired a young ranch hand to help with the work. Julia's garden flourished, providing vegetables they ate fresh and preserved for winter. They added chickens, pigs, and even a milk cow. The property that had been abandoned and neglected when Julia first saw it was now a thriving homestead. On their first wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Julia with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where she found a beautiful pinto mare, gentle-eyed and patient. "I thought you should have your own horse," he said. "One that is just yours." Julia named the mare Lily and took to riding her in the early mornings when Samuel was still sleeping, watching the sun rise over the prairie. There was a freedom in those rides that she treasured, a feeling of being completely herself in a way she had never been in her old life. Wheatland continued to grow around them. More families arrived, more businesses opened. A proper school was built, replacing the single-room structure. The church added a bell that could be heard for miles. Julia became known as someone reliable and capable, someone you could count on for help or advice. She organized a women's sewing circle that met monthly, and she taught reading to some of the ranch hands who had never learned. When Samuel was 2, Julia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, though caring for an active toddler while growing increasingly large was its own challenge. Nathan and Samuel had become inseparable, and Julia often found them together in the barn, Nathan teaching his son about horses and cattle in a patient, gentle voice. Their daughter arrived on a spring morning in 1882, coming so quickly that Mrs. O'Brien barely arrived in time. She was smaller than Samuel had been, with a full head of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Caroline after Julia's mother. Caroline was a different baby than Samuel had been, more content and easy-going. She slept through the night early and smiled at everyone. Samuel was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything, bringing her toys, patting her head with toddler gentleness. Julia sometimes thought about her life in Philadelphia, but it felt like a story about someone else. That Julia, the one who had worn black and believed she would never be happy again, seemed like a stranger. This Julia, the one with sun-bronzed skin and calloused hands, the one who could rope a cow and bake bread and deliver a calf, the one who laughed freely and loved deeply, was real. One evening when Caroline was 6 months old, Julia was sitting on the porch watching Samuel chase fireflies while Nathan worked on mending a fence post. The baby slept in her arms, making small, contented sounds. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. From inside the house came the smell of bread baking. The chickens were settling for the night with quiet clucks. One of the cows lowed softly in the distance. Nathan came to sit beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What are you thinking about?" "How different my life is from what I thought it would be. How glad I am that everything changed." Nathan put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Do you ever regret coming here, leaving everything you knew?" "Never," Julia said firmly. "I left behind a life that was not really mine. Here, I found the life I was meant to live. I found you. I found myself." "You saved me too, you know," Nathan said quietly. "I was lonely before you came. I had my work and my land, but I did not have anyone to share it with, anyone to build something for. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving." Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other then." They sat together as the stars came out, their children safe and happy, their home solid around them. It was not a life without challenges or hardships. There would be difficult winters and dry summers, illness and loss, the normal trials of living. But they would face it all together, and that made everything bearable. Years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. Caroline was quieter but equally determined, more interested in books and music than horses, though she could handle livestock when needed. In 1885, another son joined the family, a boy they named Thomas, giving Julia's late husband the recognition she felt he deserved, even if their marriage had not been a love match. Thomas was a sturdy, serious baby who grew into a thoughtful child. He had his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament, and he loved working with his hands, building things, fixing things. By the time he was 5, he could repair a broken wagon wheel better than some grown men. Nathan's ranch had grown into one of the more successful operations in the area. He employed several ranch hands year-round and hired additional help during busy seasons. He had built a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle, and buyers came from as far as Cheyenne to purchase his stock. Julia had her own successes. Her garden had expanded to include a small orchard of fruit trees. She kept bees and sold honey. She had learned to make butter and cheese that were in high demand at the general store. The extra income was saved carefully, put away for the children's futures. But more than the material success, what filled Julia with satisfaction was the life they had built. Their home was always full of laughter and activity. Sunday dinners often included neighbors and friends, their table laden with food and surrounded by good conversation. Holidays were celebrated with enthusiasm, traditions established that the children would carry into their own adult lives. Samuel was 12 when he first asked about Julia's past. They were working in the garden together, weeding the rows of beans when he said, "Ma, you never talk about where you came from, about your life before you came here." Julia sat back on her heels, considering her words. "I came from a very different place, a city called Philadelphia back east. My life there was comfortable but constrained. I wore fancy dresses and attended social events, but I did not know who I really was." "Did you love Pa when you first met him?" Samuel asked. "No," Julia said honestly. "I barely knew him, but I recognized something in him, something genuine and kind. Love came later, but it came strong and true, and it has only grown deeper with time." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "He talks about you like you are the most wonderful person in the world, and I feel the same about him," Julia said. "That is what real love should be, mutual admiration and respect, built on shared work and shared dreams." When Caroline was 10, she announced she wanted to be a teacher. Julia helped her study, ordering books from back east, teaching her history and literature and mathematics. Nathan built her a desk in a quiet corner of the house where she could study without interruption. By the time she was 16, she was assisting at the school, and by 18, she had taken over as the primary teacher when the previous teacher retired. Julia attended Caroline's first day as the full teacher, watching her daughter stand before the classroom with confidence and grace. It was another full-circle moment, seeing this child she had brought into the world now shaping the minds of the next generation. Samuel showed no interest in formal education beyond the basics, but he had a gift with animals and the land. By the time he was 17, he was managing much of the ranch's day-to-day operations, and Nathan talked about eventually turning the whole operation over to him. Samuel was courting a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a capable young woman named Anna who could ride and rope with the best of them. Thomas, at 13, had decided he wanted to be a blacksmith. He had apprenticed himself to old Mr. Carlson in town and showed real aptitude for the work. Every spare moment he had was spent at the forge, learning to shape metal, to shoe horses, to repair tools and equipment. Julia and Nathan watched their children grow and thrive with deep satisfaction. They had given them stability, love, and opportunity. They had taught them to work hard, to treat people fairly, to pursue their dreams with determination. On a summer evening in 1895, 17 years after Julia had first arrived in Wheatland, she and Nathan sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their 40s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces marked by years of sun and wind and hard work. But they were healthy and strong, and the love between them had only deepened. "You remember the day we met?" Julia asked, taking Nathan's hand. "Every detail," Nathan said. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking like you were attending your own funeral. Black dress, black veil, shoulders so tense I thought you might shatter. But your eyes, when I got close enough to see them, were fierce. You were not broken, just battered. I knew right then you were someone special. I thought you were the kindest man I had ever met," Julia said. No one in my entire life had offered help without expecting something in return, but you just offered, simple as that. You started giving me reasons to hope again, to believe that life could be good. You gave me reasons to believe in love, Nathan said. I had resigned myself to being alone. I thought maybe love was not meant for everyone, that some of us were just supposed to work hard and be content with that. Then you showed me what it meant to share a life with someone, to build something together that is greater than either of us alone. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of Thomas working on some project. Caroline had come for dinner and was still inside, washing dishes. Samuel was at his own place now, the small ranch he had established on land adjacent to theirs. We did well, Julia said softly. We built something good here. We did, Nathan agreed, and it is not finished yet. We have years ahead of us still, grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch together. Samuel married Anna the following spring in the same church where Julia and Nathan had wed. It was a joyous occasion, with the whole community celebrating. Within a year, Julia and Nathan became grandparents to a beautiful baby girl named Emma. Julia held her granddaughter and felt the circle of life continue, generation following generation. Caroline married a school teacher from Laramie a few years later, a gentle man who shared her love of learning. They settled in Wheatland, and Caroline continued teaching. Thomas, after finishing his apprenticeship, opened his own blacksmith shop and married the daughter of the town doctor. Julia and Nathan watched their children build their own lives and families with pride and satisfaction. Their house, which had once been full of the chaos of small children, was quieter now. But it was still the gathering place for family dinners, holiday celebrations, and Sunday afternoons. Nathan slowed down as he entered his 50s, letting Samuel take over more of the ranch work. He still rode out daily, still checked on the cattle and the land, but he was content to let the next generation carry the burden of the heavy work. He spent more time on projects around the house, building furniture for his children and grandchildren, whittling toys, simply being present. Julia continued her garden and her bees, but she also took up writing, recording the family's history in careful script. She wanted her grandchildren to know where they came from, to understand the journey that had brought them to this place. She wrote about Philadelphia, about Thomas Winters, about the day she stepped off the stagecoach in Mourning black. She wrote about Nathan teaching her to build a fire, about their first kiss, about the birth of each child. She wrote it all down so it would not be forgotten. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan presented Julia with a gift he had been working on in secret. A beautiful hope chest made of cedar, carved with images of their ranch, their children, the mountains in the distance. Inside, he had placed letters he had written to her over the years but never sent, declarations of love and gratitude. Julia wept as she read them, touched by the depth of emotion in every word. "You have given me everything," she told him. "You took a broken, grieving woman and taught her to live again, to love again. You gave me reasons to stop wearing black and start wearing white. You were never broken," Nathan said. "You were just waiting for the right life to begin. I am grateful every day that I got to be part of it." They renewed their vows that day, standing in the same church with their children and grandchildren as witnesses. Julia wore white this time, a simple dress but the color of new beginnings and pure joy. Nathan wore his best suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his blue eyes as bright as they had been when he was young. The minister spoke about enduring love, about couples who weather life's storms together and emerge stronger. He spoke about Julia and Nathan as an example of what marriage should be: partnership, respect, genuine affection, and shared purpose. Afterwards, There was a celebration at the ranch, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the entire county. Julia danced with Nathan as the sun set, swaying to a waltz played by the small band they had hired. She was 50 now, with silver threading through her dark hair, lines at the corners of her eyes. But she felt beautiful in Nathan's arms, cherished and loved. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Nathan asked as they danced. "Only about 100 times this week," Julia said with a smile, "but I will never get tired of hearing it. Good, because I plan to keep saying it for the rest of my life." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by everyone they loved, in the place they had built together through hard work and hope and unwavering commitment to each other. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost friends to illness and age. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Julia was 55 when Nathan had a health scare, a pain in his chest that sent Caroline racing for the doctor. It turned out to be nothing serious, but it reminded them both that their time was precious and finite. They began to travel more, taking trips to places they had always wanted to see. They visited Yellowstone and marveled at the geysers. They went to Denver and saw the growing city. They even made a trip back to Philadelphia so Julia could show Nathan where she had grown up. Standing on the street where she had lived as a girl, Julia tried to summon some feeling of nostalgia or longing. But all she felt was gratitude that her life had taken the turn it did. "This is not home anymore," she told Nathan. "Home is Wyoming with you." They returned to Wheatland with relief, glad to be back in the place they belonged. Their grandchildren were growing, some already adults themselves with children of their own. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management. Caroline's students were winning awards for their academic achievements. Thomas's blacksmith shop was known throughout the region for quality work. Julia and Nathan settled into a comfortable rhythm in their later years. They spent mornings working together in the garden, afternoons reading or taking gentle rides on their horses, evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun set. They held hands constantly, still finding comfort in physical closeness after decades of marriage. On a spring morning in 1905, Julia woke to find Nathan already up, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee watching the sunrise. She joined him, bringing her own coffee, settling into the chair beside his that had been worn to the shape of her body over the years. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, a question they had asked each other thousands of times. "About how blessed I have been," Nathan said. "About how one decision to help a woman with her trunk changed my entire life. About how grateful I am for every day we have had together." "We have built a good life," Julia said. "A family, a home, a legacy. Our children are happy and successful. Our grandchildren are growing up strong and kind. We have done what we set out to do." Nathan reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "The best decision I ever made was asking you if you needed help that day. The second best was convincing you to marry me." "You did not have to convince me very hard," Julia said with a smile. "I knew almost from the beginning that you were special, that what I felt for you was different from anything I had felt before. You taught me what love really means." They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ranch spread before them, prosperous and well-maintained. In the distance, they could see some of Samuel's cattle grazing. Closer, chickens scratched in the yard and bees hummed among the early flowers. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Nathan asked. Julia considered the question seriously. "I would not want Thomas to have died so young. That was a tragedy, even if our marriage was not ideal. But everything else, all the hardships and struggles, they shaped me into who I am. They brought me here to you, So no, I would not change anything. I feel the same, Nathan said. Every difficulty, every challenge, it was all worth it because it led to this. To us. As they aged into their 60s and then 70s, Julia and Nathan became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, thriving family. They presided over holiday gatherings that filled their house to bursting with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They told stories of the old days, of Wyoming when it was still a territory, of building the ranch from nothing, of the early days of Wheatland. The town had grown around them, no longer the rough frontier settlement it had been when Julia arrived. There were paved streets now, electric lights, automobiles alongside horses and wagons. The church had been expanded twice. A proper hospital had been built. But the spirit of the place remained the same. A community that looked out for its own, that valued hard work and integrity, that respected the land and the people who worked it. Julia and Nathan were respected elders, sought out for advice and wisdom. They had seen so much, experienced so much, learned so much. Young couples came to them for counsel about marriage. New ranchers asked Nathan's advice about cattle and land management. Women came to Julia for her recipes, her gardening knowledge, her perspective on raising children. They gave freely, sharing everything they had learned, wanting to help the next generations build their own good lives. They had been helped when they needed it, and they believed in paying that forward. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, the whole town turned out for a celebration. The church hall was decorated with white ribbons and flowers. There was a massive cake, music, and speeches honoring the couple who had become an institution in Wheatland. Julia wore white again, a beautiful dress that Caroline had helped her sew. Her hair was fully silver now, her face lined with age, but her eyes were bright and her smile radiant. Nathan, in his best suit, looked distinguished with his white hair and beard, still tall and straight despite his years. Their children and grandchildren took turns speaking, telling stories about their parents and grandparents, expressing gratitude for the example they had set. There were tears and laughter, nostalgia and joy. Through it all, Julia and Nathan sat hand in hand, touched by the outpouring of love. When it was their turn to speak, Nathan stood and helped Julia to her feet. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I married the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. She arrived in this town wearing mourning black, looking like she had given up on happiness. But she had not. She was just waiting for the right reason to hope again. He turned to Julia, his eyes full of love. You have given me the best 50 years of my life. You have blessed me with children and grandchildren, with a home full of love, with purpose and joy. Every single day with you has been a gift. Julia took his hand, her own voice clear. Nathan gave me reasons to wear white again. He taught me what love really means, showed me that life could be good even after loss. He helped me build a life I could never have imagined, better than anything I could have dreamed. These 50 years have been the greatest adventure, and I would not change a single moment. They kissed, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and stories. Julia and Nathan danced together one more time, moving slowly to a waltz, held safe in each other's arms. In their final years, health began to fail in the way it does for everyone eventually. Nathan's heart grew weaker, his steps slower. Julia's joints ached with arthritis, making the work she had once done so easily now difficult. But they faced aging as they had faced everything else. Together, with grace and acceptance. Samuel moved them into his house so they could be better cared for, giving them a comfortable suite of rooms with a view of the mountains. Their great-grandchildren came to visit, climbing onto their laps to hear stories. Julia continued to write when her hands would allow it, recording the final chapters of their story. Nathan passed first, quietly in his sleep one night with Julia beside him. He was 82, and he had lived a full, rich life. Julia mourned him deeply, but not with the lost, helpless grief she had felt when Thomas died. This was the grief of having loved deeply and been loved in return, of having shared a lifetime with someone and now facing the time without them. She wore black again to his funeral, but underneath she wore white, a reminder that he had given her reasons to hope and love and live fully. The church was packed with people whose lives Nathan had touched. The tributes spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his generosity, his love for his family. Julia stood at the graveside and said her own private goodbye. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for every moment, every laugh, every kiss, every shared sunrise. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me. I will carry your love with me for whatever time I have left, and I will see you again someday." She lived 3 more years without him, years filled with her children and grandchildren, with quiet afternoons spent looking through old photographs and reading the letters he had written. She was at peace, knowing that she had been blessed beyond measure, that she had loved and been loved, that she had built something lasting and good. Julia Winters Nash passed away on a spring morning in 1932, surrounded by her family. Her last words were a smile and Nathan. Her children and grandchildren knew she had gone to join the man she had loved for more than 50 years. They buried her beside Nathan, in the cemetery overlooking the town they had helped build. The headstone read, "Julia Winters Nash, 1854–1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She arrived in mourning black. He gave her reasons to wear white again. The family they had built continued, generation after generation, carrying forward the legacy of love, hard work, and hope that Julia and Nathan had established. The ranch remained in the family for decades, a testament to what 2 people could build together when they committed to shared dreams and unwavering love. Their story became part of Wheatland's history, told and retold, an example of frontier courage and enduring love. The house they had shared, eventually restored and preserved, became a local landmark. Their letters and Julia's writings were donated to the Historical Society, treasured records of life in early Wyoming. But more than the physical legacy, what endured was the example they had set. They had shown that it was possible to start over, to build something new from loss and grief. They had proven that real love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about choosing each other every day, working together through challenges, building a life of purpose and meaning. Julia had arrived in Wheatland as a widow in mourning black, believing her life was essentially over at 24. She had left this world as a beloved matriarch who had lived fully and loved deeply, who had raised a family and built a legacy, who had known joy and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. And it had all started with a cowboy who offered to help carry her trunk, who saw past her grief to the strong woman underneath, who gave her reasons to hope again, to dream again, to love again. Nathan had given her reasons to wear white, and she had spent the rest of her life proving that love, real love, was worth every risk, every vulnerability, every moment of opening yourself to another person. Their love story became legendary in Wheatland, passed down through the generations as an example of what was possible when 2 people found each other at the right time, in the right place, and chose to build something beautiful together. It was a reminder that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into hope, and that sometimes the best chapters of life were still to be written, even when all seemed dark. The cowboy and the widow in mourning black had created something that outlasted them both. A legacy of love, family, and hope that rippled forward through time, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring people they would never know. And somewhere in whatever comes after, they were together again, dancing under the stars, forever young, forever in love, forever home.